So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the forms that you as an inspector would use to document the different aspects of the construction process and to kind of facilitate the inspection process. So most of the forms I'm going to show are either directly from or slightly modified versions of the standard FHWA drilled shaft forms, which are easily available on the internet. If you just Google FHWA drilled shaft forms, they've got about 15 or so different forms for different aspects of drilled shaft construction. So this is a form out of the special provisions that the contractor is required to fill out. But I would just encourage you as the inspector to make sure that you're independently documenting all this information, either filling out your own copy of this form or making sure that all this information is documented somewhere in your notes. So here's an inspector's drilling log. So this is the form for documenting the excavation. It's got columns for depth and times, so time when the tool goes down in the hole and out of the hole, so you can kind of calculate drilling rates, how long is it taking them to advance the hole. Column for elevation and a soil description, and then you can draw things on this log or make notes on the little blank part there to make notes of the material. And then lots of details of things like tools used and key elevations and that kind of thing. So the form on the left is kind of a generic base inspection form that you might use if you're just using a weighted tape. The form on the right is an example of a base inspection form tailored to mini-SID visual inspection. And so the contractor or a special testing contractor will be performing the mini-SID, and they'll probably have a copy of one of these forms that'll get filled out. And it just describes the different locations and how clean it was in those different locations and that kind of thing. And as you can kind of see, the relevant parties have signed off on it here to indicate that the shaft is ready for concrete placement. Concrete forms, so we have a placement log and then a plot that goes with that to record the volumes of concrete. And so I've got an example of that filled out here. So basically we're keeping a record of the volume of concrete placed in the shaft, and the depth or elevation either works, just as long as you're being consistent with what you're referencing to. And we want to plot that on a concrete curve. So we've got the so-called neat line or theoretical line, a lot of different terms used for that line, but that's basically the theoretical volume of our cylinder of the shaft. So we always want to be a little bit below that, indicating we're putting at least enough concrete in the ground to fill up our theoretical volume. And we'll talk more into details about what these curves mean in the concrete placement segment, but shown here as the forms. I also point out this is a handy place where you can keep track of where the trimming was. So you can just kind of plot where the tip of the trimming was on that same graph. There's a lot going on during the pour, so any information you can go ahead and get ready on this is helpful. It's also helpful if you've got an iPad or a computer. You can do this, in a spreadsheet and be plotting it in real time. And if you see something that that doesn't look right, you already know right then and there, hey, maybe we have a problem. And then this is kind of the generic FHWA, drilled shaft inspector's checklist. I think there's one that's been a little bit more tailored to Red Wing, but it's just different aspects of the construction process and making sure you're looking at all the things you need to be looking at, just to kind of remind yourself, make sure you're not missing anything. You know, one of the roles of the inspector may be to keep track of pay items and quantities for pay items. So there's a pay item form that's specifically tailored for that. This is intended as kind of a real simple drilled shaft installation plan kind of template, but as an inspector, you might use this form to kind of go through when you're inspecting the contractor's equipment and going through their installation plan, kind of recording what they've put out and using it as a way to document what's in their installation plan and what has shown up on site, and does it all line up. So as kind of a minimum for documentation, I would say you need a shaft log, so the excavation log, the base inspection report, or some good documentation of your base inspection, and then the concrete placement log and volume graph. The other forms are maybe not quite as necessary, but they're certainly useful in different situations.